All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am not Kevin Brewer, but welcome to the Arborjet Ecologel webinar on incorporating soil health and the Supersonic Air Knife into your business. This is a really interesting topic. It's something I've always been pushing to try to get more people to get PHC into their business. You can make a lot of money really easily, kind of increase the amount of share that you have over the market, and also it can save your back, your joints, all that, because it usually doesn't involve a lot of climbing or rigorous lifting heavy things. So please pay attention. You might want to grab a notepad and a pen because he has got some really in-depth things to talk about here. At the end of this webinar, I will post something in the comment section as well as in the description of the videos. It's a link that will take you to a quiz. That is how you can get your 2 free CEUs. Now, if you are watching this in the future on the pre-recorded, like 3 or 4 days after the actual broadcast, you can still take that quiz. This video is going to be up forever, but that quiz is only going to be worth 1 CEU at that point in time. So you have a little bit of grace time on taking that quiz, maybe about 48 hours. So, but make sure you take it to get your CEUs. A couple things right now. At Tree Stuff, we have a flash sale category up. Go ahead and find that. It's on the left side of the screen. Also, there's a melting carabiner. It says like heat wave, something or other graphic there. If you click on that, it'll take you to all the sales. A bunch of stuff on discount. Go ahead and go to that after the webinar. If you have any questions about what Kevin is talking about, go ahead and put it in the chat section. We will stop and ask him questions a couple times throughout the webinar, so please ask away. The last thing I have to talk about is a pretty important thing that I have to talk about, and that is the most exciting, best event for the tree care industry. That is Treetopia 2024. That is coming up in August. That's the 16th and the 17th in Mare Island, California. It's a gorgeous, used to be an old naval base. It's really cool. It's beautiful. There's all the crazy trees around that you need to come check out. And we are hosting 2 days of games, of classes, like all of the big instructors are going to be there. Nick Arrea, all of his certified arborists, he's sending them down. They're teaching classes. We've got Mark Chisholm, Craig Bachman. I believe Jared Aubergine is going to be there. So there's going to be a lot of CEUs that you can get. It's all outside. Everything's very hands-on and actually talking with the instructors, as well as we have the crazy games that Tree Stuff and A+ are known for, like the Human Claw. You can win prizes, everything. You buy the 1 ticket to get in, and then you can do all the classes, all the games for free, as well as 2 big after parties where there will be climbing competitions as well as an exhibition climbing competition, like Capture the Canopy style that we did last time. Nighttime, had lights and a band going. It was super cool, lots of fun. Go to treetopiausa.com and get the early bird pricing and make your plans, because that early bird pricing will not last forever. We're also going to have even more vendors and exhibitors than we did last year. We're pretty much taking over the entire island. It's going to be huge. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's definitely worth your time. Without any further ado, I believe it is time for me to go ahead and switch it on over to Kevin Brewer for the presentation. Kevin, take it away.
Thank you, Cale, and thank you all for joining me today. So I'm the Northeast Technical Manager for Arborjet Ecologel, and today we're going to be talking about soil health and the Supersonic Air Knife. So to begin with, first, we're going to jump into the slideshow. But we're going to take 3 different breaks throughout the presentation to answer some questions. There's kind of 3 sections. There's one about uses for the supersonic air knife, then about kind of soil amendment products, soil health, and then plant growth regulators. And we'll take a little break between every one for questions. So first, we'll give a little bit of history on how Arborjet Ecologel can talk about supersonic air knife and how I ended up here talking to you about it. So we started off in 2000 as a privately held company. We still are a privately held company, which means tree preservation is always our #1 priority. But we started off treating hemlock woolly adelgid, trying to find an injectable way to solve that problem in the Boston area. There was a little more environmentally friendly than spraying all these tall trees in quite tight urban areas. From there, we moved on over the years to make our claim to fame with a treatment for emerald ash borer, one of the most effective treatment that's come to be, 99.9% effective with trunk injection, and went on to deal with a lot of other invasive insects and disease from Texas Phoenix palm decline, oak wilt, Dutch elm disease. We found solutions for all these invasive issues. And once we kind of got all those taken care of, we started looking at kind of what some native issues were to native trees. And a lot of that came down to poor soils, urban environment, and that's when you start really seeing those problems with native pests attacking native trees. So in 2018, we acquired a majority interest in a company called Ecologel Solutions, and they make a bunch of really cool soil amendment properties and water control products that prevent evaporation, which we'll get more into detail later. But with that acquisition, now we're able to kind of start amending the soil rather than using the same pesticides over and over again, trying to treat a native pest on a native tree when it was a soil issue or an urban environment issue. So, through that acquisition, we were able to get through some of those soil health issues. We design, develop, and manufacture all of our own products. We're committed to the environmental responsibility part of it. And then 3 years ago, we were able to acquire Supersonic Air Knife. So that's been super cool. So now we're a complete plant health care research and development company from the ground up, really working with the soil now. And we find that to be a very effective way to take care of a lot of native insect and disease controls. It's just by reducing the stress on plants, by improving their growing conditions. So a little bit about myself. I've been in the green industry for 20 years. I've been involved in all aspects of tree work. I started off as a brush dragger and a tree planter, as most of us do. Wasn't too long after that, I got tired of cleaning up the mess and I definitely can't hear anything coming back. Hey, all right, you can hear me. So where did we leave off? Okay, I'll screen share back.
Left off at saving trees.
No, I know. I was saying from when they could hear me.
Can
All right, you can hear me now? Do you want me just to start over from the beginning? You missed all that? Okay. We'll start over with how Arborjet and Ecologel came to be here, where we're talking about Supersonic Air Knife now. So we were established in 2000 as a plant healthcare company. Acquired Ecologel Solutions in 2018, which got us into the soil health part. Then we acquired Supersonic Air Knife about 3 years ago. So now we're a full top to bottom soil to canopy tree health research and development company. So I myself have 20 years experience in the green industry. I've been involved in all aspects of arboriculture, from drag and brush, planting trees, to climate and plant healthcare. So, drag brush and planted trees for about a year before I decided I wanted to get into climbing. Been a certified arborist since 2013, a board certified master arborist since 2018, and in 2020 became a registered consulting arborist. So the Supersonic Air Knife, just to give you a little bit of information on that, what it is it's a piece of machinery that uses high volume compressed air. It runs at about Mach 1.7, so it's very fast air coming out of the end. You run this off a compressor that's we recommend 185 CFM, 90 to 120 PSI. So it's usually a tow behind really large compressor. What it does is it loosens up and removes soil from buried objects, roots, utilities, without causing any damage to roots. My favorite part about it is it's extremely fun. I find it very entertaining. I'm always curious, after working with trees above ground for so long, to see what's going on below ground. And I find it to be the perfect intersection of general tree care, kind of that tree work, climbing life, cutting trees, and plant health care, which is very slow paced and more about the health of the tree, because you don't need a plant health care license to do this. But you can make a huge difference on the health of the tree, but it's still, very active work and fun, messy work. So it's that perfect intersection of the two. So some things that we can do with the Supersonic Air Knife to integrate that into our business are, we're going to go over all these in depth, but different types of vertical mulching, trenching, soil rejuvenation, root crown inspections, pre-construction inspections, and then working near utilities and irrigation and lighting installations without doing damage to trees. So for the product line, we have the standard, which is pretty much what everybody uses in the arboricultural industry. Then there's the high flow, which is if you're doing large areas of soil renovation. The standard, which comes with a liquid option as well, in the middle. And that's for if you have really dry, compact clay soils. The introduction of liquid into the airstream on the way through really helps break that soil up much better. And if you're in an urban environment, it helps keep the dust down significantly. So there can be a lot of benefits to that liquid version as well. And then the vacuum runs off the same compressor. It's all the way to the right. It's about 3-inch diameter. And that thing is pretty much hollow all the way through. So you can vacuum gravel. You can even, vacuum stump grindings, dirt, everything like that. But the purpose of it is once you loosen up all that soil around a tree, if you need to remove it, to just try to take a shovel and move it, then you start doing root damage that you're trying to avoid in the first place. So the vacuum is very beneficial in avoiding the damage you're trying to prevent. As far as explaining the piece of equipment, so you can know a little more about it if you're not familiar with them, is there's just a pressure gauge on top. And really the most important that thing the pressure gauge is for is the pressure will drop the farther away from the compressor you get, the longer the hose run you have. So if you're 20, 30 feet away with 30 feet of hose, that's going to be reading 90 to 120 PSI. If you start getting out towards 200 feet and you pull the trigger and it drops down to 60, it's kind of just a little bit of a kind of an affirmation of why things might be taking a little longer. The compressor might just be a little far away. The ergonomic trigger assembly. So we designed this to be a push down trigger. something that's pushing up at you. So it's very ergonomic. You just kind of lean into it, and as it pushes back, it holds itself on, rather than a gas pump style handle where you're pulling up on something, pushing up, which can be very tiresome on your shoulders. It has an adjustable handle also for heat protection in the center, little dust control cone in the middle, and then a stainless steel nozzle and wear tip, just so it doesn't get dinged up when you inevitably put that into a couple rocks when you're moving around working. But we'll get right to what you can do with it. So vertical mulching is extremely beneficial for the time input you're on site. So for your budget conscious customers where you don't have the most money or time to work with, but the trees are struggling, they want to do something, vertical mulching is probably the most cost-effective way to turn a tree around when poor soil health is the problem. So what you do that is you basically on a 3x3 foot grid pattern underneath the canopy of the tree, you take the Supersonic Air Knife, move that handle all the way up to the top, pull the trigger, and generally just bore the barrel straight down into the ground as far as you can, up to 3 feet, and try to bore a hole about 2 to 3 inches in diameter for that complete depth. Do that on a 3x3 grid, and then you would backfill those vertical areas with amended native soil. You can use biochar, compost, depending on what your goal is. The compost and the native soils will help decompact a wider area than just there, or biochar could help with drainage issues. And we also have other root growth stimulants, which we'll talk about later, which would kind of draw the tree's attention to kind of grow a little better in those decompacted zones. And another beneficial part about it is it can be done with trees in the lawn. So a lot of decompacting soil, you would have to, if you're doing a complete soil renovation, you have to take the turf out. That can be disruptive, and homeowners might not want to go for that. But the vertical mulching you can do pretty well through a lawn because you're just making little boreholes every 3 feet. But a good tip for if you're going to do this, I use a orange construction cone, just like we use for marking off the chippers in the road. And you cut the top out just so the barrel can fit through the top of the cone. And then when you bore that hole, it keeps all the dust and dirt nice and tight under the cone, which is nice from making a mess and being real dusty. But then you can flip the cone upside down, stuff it in the hole, and use the cone as a funnel to refill it with any of your compost, biochar, all your other backfill ingredients. Just flip it over and use it as a funnel. So it's a very efficient way to be able to move through the process. So radial trenching is probably the next best scenario in the tree health aspect of using the Supersonic Air Knife. So you get tons of benefits with this. It's a little more labor intensive than the vertical mulching, but you get really great results with this in large compacted areas, especially on mature trees or trees that are just really not living up to their genetic potential, not quite growing as much as they should. So it's a spoken wheel type pattern like you see on the right-hand side there in the picture. If you're doing larger trees, you would start off with kind of those 6 or 7 spokes at the base. And once you're 10 or 15 feet away, you'd start a spoke like halfway between them. So every 6 or 8 feet, you've got a spoke started. So, you might have 15 by the time you get to the outside of the drip edge, but you're going to start with those 6 or 7. We're trying to get those radial trenches about 6 to 8 inches wide and 8 to 12 inches deep. That's going to give you the maximum benefit for it. And then in that backfill, you could either, once the soil is loosened up, you can top dress it with compost and your soil amendment products. And then you can go back with the air knife and literally just kind of stir it all back in, and that'll work those nutrients down into that 8 to 12 inch deep trench. It works for large and small trees. And it can be done in stages also to fit a budget. It's another one where, if the customer can't quite do it all at once, you can do, kind of alternate where the radial trenches are. You do them around the whole tree evenly, but you might do one every 10 feet. And then the next year come back and do one in between. And that's going to help decompact the soil within several feet of just where that trench is. The roots will be able to start growing into that nice new organic matter in the soil there. And it also helps with drainage a little bit. And you can combine this with the vertical mulching also. So you can do the radial trench and then do the 3x3 grid with the 3 foot deep holes as well. So you can do some combos there, but it's a great way to increase vigor. We worked on a large project with this with the 9/11 Memorial in Pennsylvania for the National Park Service. They planted about 2,000 trees in very highly compacted clay. It was an open pit reclaimed coal mine. They got turned into the memorial. And these trees, after 10 years, they were really struggling. Not a lot of growth going on. The red oaks were only putting out about 1 inch a year, which is way less than what they should be at a young tree. So they did radial trenching on all trees that were worth saving in that. And several years later, they're now putting on 3-4 inches a year. It's not with the use of a lot of fertilizers, just amending that soil, loosening it up, and giving the trees, some oxygen and some room to breathe, literally. And then soil rejuvenation. This is kind of the large area work you can do. If you've got a tree in decline, you've got a good budget, being able to kind of loosen up that soil profile for the whole top 8 to 12 inches and the entire area under the canopy. You can see on the right where that entire mulch bed is. If it's in a lawn panel and you can get rid of that turf and just loosen up the soil, work in some organic compost and some amendments, you're really going to see a really great benefit and be done in one go. As long as you can keep that soil from recompacting, like if it's a park and people are running all over it and walking on it, that's what the mulch helps with. But you really can make a lifelong difference for that tree in a single event by decompacting all that soil. It's a good time for new plantings also. Trees do better in diverse plantings. It attracts diverse population of insects, which help keep diseases down. So when you've got all that soil loosened up, it's a great time to kind of you can take some potted trees or some B&B trees, or we'll talk about bare root transplanting, and be able to blast out kind of with the air knife a planting hole to be able to put those plants into without taking a shovel and cutting the roots out. So you can kind of work the plants all in together, get a nice diverse landscape going quite quickly without doing any harm and some really nice amended soil. You can help fix drainage issues with this as well. And again, you can also combine this with the vertical mulching, get a little more depth into the soil profile, especially with seriously compacted soils. You could have 12 to 20 inches of compacted soil. So if you can do a 3-foot deep borehole on 3-foot centers for that vertical mulching and get into decompacted, unrestrained soils, you'll see a great benefit to the trees. Root crown inspections. This is probably the most common thing people use the air knife for. Trees are still commonly planted far too deep, which causes girdling roots. Volcano mulching causes girdling roots. And containerized plants, if you don't loosen up those circular roots around the outside of the container before planting, those end up turning into girdling roots as well. Some things you have to look for, it might point you to this, is branch decline, weak-looking growth, poor-looking health, high pest pressure on a native tree. If you've got, an oak tree and you really can't see a root flare, here in the Northeast, and it's really getting hammered by like Lecanium scale, which is not a pest you normally would see in the woods, it's a good chance to look for some, compacted soils, girdling roots, and things of that nature. So you can go in there, you can expose those roots and start cutting away. You might not be able to cut every girdling root away in one season, especially if it's been a problem for a long time. So a rule of thumb I go by, if the tree is still fairly healthy, it's pretty preemptive, you don't want to cut more than 25% of the trunk area's worth of roots combined. So if you were to kind of imagine the stump area of that tree, if you were to cut it down looking down, don't cut more than enough, 1 or 2 inch roots that would fill kind of a 1/4 inch pie chart out of that. I wouldn't exceed that. I wouldn't even I wouldn't come close to that unless you have to. But that's about the place I would go, is don't go over 25%, or, rebury it, get the biggest offenders, go back 2 years later and then cut some more. And then consider a plant growth regulator. Plant growth regulators can be very beneficial. We'll talk about more later, but for construction damage or when you're root pruning, to be able to slow down that outward growth and allow the tree a little more time to just repair the roots that you've cut, because they were beneficial to the tree, even though they were going to hurt it in the future. PGRs can help quite a bit. We have one question here from Michael Gregoire. Is the air knife better for cutting through turf than the air spade? I haven't found, if you have really thick thatch and a lot of root material, actually, I don't find either one of them to be fantastic at cutting through turf. What I do when I have heavy turf around trees is I try to carefully come away from the trunk so I don't do any damage, and I'll kind of pick out a little bit of turf and then get the dirt out, and then I start kind of blowing out under the turf so I can undercut it back to the trunk of the tree. That's the way I deal with turf around trees. But when you have a really thick turf root layer right at the base of the tree, neither one is actually that great at blasting turf right out of the way. So step a few feet out from the trunk, make a little incision with a pick, and then undercut it from the side, and that'll come right out in a solid piece for you. So bare root transplanting, great benefit for trees really is how much more roots you get to take with the tree. When you take a 3-inch diameter tree and they say, yeah, take a 3-foot diameter root ball, there is so much more root mass than that to the tree. So bare root transplanting, the other benefits for it are it's much lighter without all the dirt. So you can bare root transplant a 3-inch diameter tree without really much heavy equipment at all. You're going to blow the dirt out. It's going to make a little bit of mess in the landscape to clean up. You're going to move that tree with every bit of root that it has, and it'll establish much faster. You get a lot more root to soil contact when it's replanted. So often you don't even have to stake the trees for very long at all, and they reestablish very quick. Minimal effect on surrounding plants. So the other benefit of this is if you have an established landscape and you want to take a tree out of that or several shrubs to transplant and spread them out, you don't have to pick between one or the other. Once you take the dirt away, you can kind of separate the roots from several plants that are close together and save all of them and move them a little farther apart to different sites, where if you were to do a traditional dig, bald, and burlap, you'd have to pick your favorite plant of the 3 closest because you'd be cutting major roots of the other plants, trying to save the one you want. So it's important to keep in mind, though, when you're bare root transplanting large trees, even people bare root transplant 12, 18, 20-inch diameter trees, is keeping the roots damp in the process. If you can't get the whole job done in a day, you can put down wood chips on top. You can put down wet burlap or straw or hay to keep that moisture in there. This one on the right, you can see they've kind of tied the roots together in whips and then wrapped in a fabric just to keep that moisture on there, especially if you're going to put that on a trailer or a truck and then drive it down the road. You don't want those roots to desiccate, or it'll take it a little longer to reestablish when you put it back in the ground. So you want to make sure you keep a little moisture on those. It's best on deciduous trees to do that in the spring and the fall when they're a little more dormant. But if you're really careful, if you have to move a tree in the summer, bare root transplant is definitely better than B&B, taking a smaller area. So I find any time of year bare root is more successful than digging, but it is best to do spring and fall. One second. Another project that I've done a lot of work with the Supersonic Air Knife is invasive plant removal. When it's important to remove the entire root system, most of the root system, or be able to make clean cuts on roots to apply an herbicide. So on the right here, we have porcelain vine. So this is basically like the underground nodule of porcelain vine that you have to kind of cut that node out and then paint herbicides on those roots all the way around to try to control that invasive species. So you really can't take a shovel and just try to dig these out, or you'll ruin the vascular structure of the roots. You'll get a lot of dirt in them, and then the herbicides don't really sink in. So by being able to take the air knife and blowing all that dirt away clean, you can then make very clean cuts on those roots and make a better application with the herbicide. And it's much faster. To try to dig these out carefully to make clean cuts on the roots without the air knife, it takes an exponential amount of time over using the air, where you can expose these nodules in 5-10 minutes a piece, have somebody right behind you to cut them out. It works for a lot of other species too, but porcelain vine is just a great example of a great way to manage that with air excavation and the Supersonic Air Knife. So pre-construction inspection, this is another one for it. So a lot of times this is what I've got I'll actually talk about a little bit of a case study on pre-construction inspection a little bit later. So we'll go into detail on that one, but you can find where it's best to locate piers or construction elements, or how close to a house or a wall you can go. You can see where the roots are, where they're going, and what kind of damage will be done before the construction process happens. I mean, it's got to be done early. You got to get in there, obviously, before ground compaction is best. You can make that plan and work with the engineers and builders to kind of preserve that tree. Irrigation and lighting. So here you see, I've talked to a lot of irrigation people, and they get very frustrated doing irrigation around installed landscapes and trees because typically they try to dig it out, or they end up trying to cut through roots, which aggravates us as the arborist. The trees get in decline. But being able to take the air knife and just get that dirt out of the way, and then with the vacuum it out past the irrigation and the lighting lines underneath without any damage to the tree is of great benefit to your customer. That's what they hired the the irrigation company or the lighting company to do, is add irrigation to make their landscape healthier. So if they're cutting a bunch of roots, or if a bunch of roots are getting cut in the process of trying to make them healthier, we're just not doing the customer any service. So using the air knife around existing landscape when installing underground things like irrigation and lighting goes a long way to preserve the health of the landscape. Working near utilities, the biggest benefit I see of this is the safety. That's why I put that in bold, especially if there's any electrical or natural gas. Just being able to don't have to any worry about doing any damage to that. We have no spark tips in case you're near natural gas. They have dielectric barrel options in case you're near electricity. And utilities are very expensive. In 2019, there were 532,000 excavation damage complaints for a total cost of about $30 billion. So a lot of underground damage does get done. I'm not saying all of it can be avoided, but definitely, in our industry, if we call dig safe and there's utilities anywhere close, it's really nice to be able to use the air excavation and know you're not going to do any harm to those utilities. So I'm going to go through this case study real quick, and then we'll take our first question break. So if you want to start thinking of them and typing them in. But this was a new construction project near an existing tree, quite close to the tree. On the right-hand side, you can see the corner of that house was within, we had to do construction within 5 feet of the tree, but the corner of the house was supposed to be within 3 feet of a 30-inch diameter elm tree. So right out of the gate in this one, obviously we had to shoot down. No way there's ever going to be a basement. There's really not going to be a slab foundation either. So we were able to decide on a helical pier location system, which is basically floating it on 10-inch diameter pylons. And with talking with the engineer, we could float the corner closest to the tree. So those didn't have to be extremely close, but they had to be within 5 feet. The tree had historical significance, but a building permit had been issued, but the local ordinance gave the tree committee some say in the matter, and they had a few concerns that had to be alleviated before we could go forward with this project. So first off, we started just to get permission to even see if going through with the soil excavation would be warranted. We did a ground penetrating radar scan of the area. I'm not saying this is necessary in a lot of situations, but we were able to find the root density, size, depth, and location. And that ended up being an effective way to find out which piers needed investigation and which didn't. So once we overlaid that radar scan with the construction designs, we found 3 piers that were in areas of concern. So then we went back and asked the engineer, how much wiggle room do we have on these piers? Because, a 12-inch hole 5 feet away from a tree, if you just say it's got to be here, it's a good chance you're going to hit a tree. So we were able to find out from the engineer, we could move that pier 1 foot in any direction. So once we had that, we could look back at those scans and say, there's a fair chance with that much wiggle room, we'll be able to find a place to put those piers without disrupting any major roots. So we kind of built a box that we could use as our jig to cut out an area that was where we had to fit that basically 10, 12-inch circle. So we were able to take the air away in those squares. And in the bottom left, you can see those big green lines are a 6-inch diameter root and 2 3-inch diameter roots. And that 6-inch root was directly under where the pier would have been. But with the wiggle room, we were able to move that out. And then those 3 red lines are just a couple much smaller roots. So that's 2 2-inch roots and a couple 1.5-inch roots. We were able to prune out of the way to have that 10-inch cylinder, and a couple 2-inch roots on a 30-inch diameter elm tree really aren't going to cause any perceivable effect on its health, where that 6-inch root definitely would have. So by being able to excavate the area of opportunity for them to build that house, we found an area for that first pillar to go. Then we went to the second area concern, hollowed out that square, went to a depth of 24 inches. That was what the radar scan indicated where most of the rooting was, and it was pretty dead on for where those larger roots were. So we found an area where we were only going to have to prune 4 1.25-inch roots to put that second pylon, which again is not really any significant effect on a 30-inch diameter elm. And we were able to preserve all the 2-inch diameter roots in the area. So again, another area, we were able to find it within that wiggle room for the construction. And then the third area, there was absolutely nothing right in the proposed area. So, that one was a, straight up, no discussion for the engineer at all. So, we were able to find an area where we could do this construction without doing any damage to that tree. Put the ground back, put a little sod in. I mean, you can see that's a significant tree. Shed's coming down. There wasn't any major roots under the shed, so the construction under there doesn't matter. But we're just going to float it over that lawn. The whole house itself is only 270 square feet, so it's a very small structure. But you can see how, with using the equipment we have available, and working with the construction companies beforehand and tree committees, we can come together with some ideas on how to really get this construction moving forward, because we need to build more houses. Our population's growing, but we need to do it while preserving historic trees in the process. So that's how we can do that. So here we will take a break just with a picture of that vacuum. I'm going to go through the questions now. On that same question, what are the biggest differences between the air spade and the air knife? The biggest difference I see is ergonomics. I've used both pieces of equipment. They run off the same compressor, a 185 CFM compressor between 90 and 120 PSI. So really the compressor is putting all that air out. We have a nozzle that puts it down to 1.7 Mach speed. I believe air spade is right in the same area. But I just find the ergonomics a lot easier with the air knife. It's solid metal. I find it a little more rugged. With that, that top handle trigger that you're pushing down on, like you see on that vacuum, you're pushing down on something pushing up. So if you've got a long day on it, it's really going to help your shoulder and your elbow to be able to kind of keep that going all day long without as much fatigue. Let's see. Next we have, all right, if you're a mom and pop tree cutting service, how would you suggest selling your air knife services? I would suggest selling that just, when you go to a customer's house and, say it's an urban area, they see one in decline and they're kind of broken up about it. They're connected to their trees. You can say, this tree's going into decline because of compacted soils. If we loosen these soils up, we can give it a better chance. But even if that one tree is a little too far away, we can talk about some of the other trees on the property and how it might be beneficial to do the soil work to keep those healthier. Especially if you have people that are pesticide averse, the best thing to reduce the use of pesticides is to have healthy plants and healthy soils. So those are kind of the best ways is, if you're a smaller company, is your customer base, which customers don't like, a lot of pesticide use or who's really attached to their trees and what soils are trouble or when you see construction near trees. Just kind of making your customers aware that it's a way to have that kind of benefit on a property. So then, is there any certification or training needed to use an air knife or an air spade? There is no certification required to use the Supersonic Air Knife. As far as training goes, we do have some videos online. I'm trying to make more, but we have 9 technical managers throughout the country with Arborjet or Ecologel. And if you wanted some hands-on training, feel free to go to our website, arborjet.com, or reach out to any of our technical managers, and we'd be happy to catch up with you. And do hands-on training with this equipment, explain it more, go over the benefits of it, and how to operate it safely. It's not too bad of a learning curve. It's pretty intuitive once you get going, loosening up the soil and doing it safely. All right. Is there any soil types that limit effectiveness? Compacted dry clay can limit effectiveness. So if you get into those compacted areas where you have compacted clay soils, you see that a lot around city trees. Western New York has a lot. There's a lot of pockets of clay throughout the country. You'd want to go and water the area the day before, and that's going to help loosen it up, and then it would be much more effective. If you don't have the opportunity to water it the day before, that's when that Supersonic Air Knife with the water inlet would be a better option. So it works in all types of soils, but you do have to treat the soils differently, and you would want to quote a different amount of time. Clay soil will take longer to work with. And if you have a lot of really large rocks to work around, that's going to limit your ability also, because you're going to have to, if you were doing that 3x3 grid with vertical mulching and you're hitting a lot of rock or ledge, you're going to have to try more access sites. So it's more, you just have to bid it appropriately for the soil type, but all soil types can be benefited by it. How do you tell how bad the soil compaction is? You could tell that with a soil compaction meter. So they sell these meters that basically just have a little point on the front. There's a gauge on the other end that goes from 0 to red. You try to push that needle into the soil and you just see how far that gauge goes up towards red. Gets to red, highly compacted. So generally you can just get a feel for it with those soil compaction needles, or just, with a hand trowel, just start picking at it, and then go off into a mulch bed, and kind of pick with a little soil there. I like to do that in front of customers back when I used to do this work is, kind of go near the tree I want to do the work with and show them how hard the soil is, and then go to like a mulch bed at the foundation of the house and show them how soft the soil is, and see, these plants are healthy, this soil's soft, and that's the compaction difference. And then, are there additional tools that you would suggest to determine the indication for this service, e.g. soil compaction testing probe? Yeah, so for this soil, for the other services you could see to indicate it is your tree health, yes. And you could do a soil test for organic matter. You want 2 to 5% organic matter in your soil. Once you get below that, you should be thinking about breaking that soil up and getting some organic matter in there immediately for the tree's health. Once organic matter drops below 2%, you start to see a lot of health issues with trees. And that's what you would want to amend that soil a little faster than, say, just putting some mulch on top. Because that can take, we'll talk about mulch a little more later. But mulch alone can take 5 to 7 years to decompact soil and get some good amendments going, where the air knife can do it immediately. So determining whether that's an indication for the service, yeah, the soil probes for compaction, and then testing for organic matter. And then drainage. You can just see how the soil drainage is in the area also. So thank you. We'll keep an eye out for more questions there. I'll just go over some pictures of some jobs. So this is the air knife vacuum again. So we loosened up those trenches. We're just starting to vacuum them out. And that's to not do any root damage. It just goes off into basically a mesh bag where the heavier particles get collected, but the air can get through. Here's a tree that just was in mulch for way too long. You can see a big root flare on this oak just under those girdling roots. It's probably been, under the mulch for 20, 30 years in that playground. So getting that mulch away, breaking it up, there's probably some good organic, matter in the soil, but getting those girdling roots away from that oak tree will help in the long run, for sure. Here's just an example of a way to contain the mess of the air knife. You won't find all the soil you started with if you don't try to contain it in some way. So I just treat it like a stump grinder. You can do a little plywood wall, pretty much any barrier you want, silt fencing, but just try to contain it a little bit, or else it will escape you and you'll have to bring in some soil to refill the trenches you made. So if you don't plan on bringing in amended soil, try to contain what you're working with. So here's just side by side of 2 different vacuum options. The one on the right is going to be the newer model moving forward. We've definitely made some benefits to it. The one on the left, you can see, had about a 3-foot barrel on it before it went off into the tube. And that worked better for deep trenching, for utilities, when you were getting 4 or 5 feet deep to keep the hose a little higher. But we find in tree work, it's much more beneficial to keep the tubing lower to the ground. So we shorten the barrel down for the tree work side of it to about 18 to 20 inches before it goes into that tubing. And again, that reduces a lot of weight, makes it a lot more ergonomic, a lot easier on your back. And you can see what you're doing a lot easier too. And it can be interchangeable between the air knife and the vacuum then, because you can have an interchangeable coupling on the end. So it can almost be a 2-in-1 piece of equipment rather than having to have 2 pieces of equipment with separate hoses running to them. It's a much faster turnover, much more efficient way to go through the process. Alex from Germany, is this device sold outside of the USA? Yes, there is ways to get this outside of the USA. I know Vertical Supply Group and Tree Stuff owns several distributors in the UK. So they can definitely sell there. And, if there's other countries, I don't know if they service Germany, but yeah, feel free to reach us at Arborjet. We can definitely connect you with somebody that would be able to take care of that for you. And here's just a little bit of that pre-work again on that maple. So this was just construction. We just put up a little bit of a guard along that house that was newly constructed. So we didn't do any damage to the new paint or the siding. And this was just a one-time compaction mitigation project. The construction was a one-time event in the yard. So just did that radial trenching, worked in some organic matter to make sure that tree didn't go into decline in the future. Because that's the problem. Once you do construction and compact the soil, that's a good time to recommend this service, because if you wait to see if it affected the tree's health and 4 or 5 years down the road, that tree's declining, it's a little late to jump in. You still can turn that tree around, but it's much better to be proactive. By the time that tree starts declining, it's generally run through all its carbohydrate stores. And then it's really starting to sink quick. So it's better to preemptive. If somebody does construction near a tree, just recommend this service as a preemptive method. Here's just a memorial tree that was planted a little bit too deep or settled after planting. We see that also. If you dig the hole a little too deep, the trees will settle. So we just had to adjust for the root crown here. So now we're going to move into what is healthy soil and how can we work with that. So healthy soil, by definition, has a strong soil structure. So it should hold together wet or dry. A sandy soil, if it's too high in sand content or lacking organic matter, when it dries out, it just crumbles. So you want something that's going to hold together well, wet or dry, and it allows water infiltration, but has small pores to hold water. So you don't want water to pool on the surface and soak in slowly over time. You want good water penetration to the soil, and you can use surfactants for that. And it has an abundant and diverse biological community. So you have to have insects and worms and fungi and bacteria, and that's good soil health. But the thing I highlight in bold here is it requires an adequate cover from dead and living plant material. So if you've got lawns where you're bagging all the clippings, you've got the living cover, but you don't have any dead plant material covering. And you need that to break down. And it's that symbiotic relationship between fungi that break down the dead matter and the living plants that are supporting that fungi through carbohydrates that make a real, working soil. If you don't have any living plants in that mulch, you can't have the fungi there that would benefit trees in the future. So you want to have diverse plantings that allow for dead and living material to have those relationships. So if you have that tree and you do a giant, mulch desert around it, it is better than turf, and it will help decompact the soil, but it's also better to work in some diverse plantings into that mulch bed to have the living and dead material working together. And then it has to efficiently release nutrients essential for the plants, as well as keep them near the surface. You can't have too much leaching. So what we see in urban soils is they're very compacted. They lack organic matter. They have insufficient cover from the elements. So a lot of times in parks, we have just exposed soil. And then foot traffic and rain alone can compact soil when it doesn't have living cover on it or mulch or some kind of organic layer. And there's a lack of diverse biological activity. You don't find a lot of insects. You don't find a lot of worms. It's highly disturbed. So it's been turned up. We don't have that organic matter. And it lacks the ability to exchange and hold nutrients essential for plants. Hold on, I see one question. I'm going to look over here real quick because it's back about the air knife. So it says, if you tried to use the knife and the vacuum simultaneously, and yes, you can do this when you have two people, but you would want to bump up to a 375 CFM compressor to make sure you have enough air to operate both at the same time. So 185 operates them individually, but you would want to go to a 375 CFM compressor to run them simultaneously with two people. So back to the urban soils. So what can we do about this, to help these trees? Because the effects that poor soil has, some signs that we have is reduced growth potential. We have, say, again, that oak or that maple where we know, healthy in a nice garden or in the woods, they put on 6 or 8 inches a year, but they're only growing 2 or 3. Poor soil has that effect. They don't have the nutrients to be as effective as possible. They reduce the ability to produce photosynthase, so they don't quite have that healthy canopy, so they can't produce the sugars that they need to grow and protect themselves. You get heightened pest pressure, again, because they can't defend themselves from pests because they haven't been able to build those compounds because they don't have the photosynthase. They're susceptible to drought because they have, root dieback. The water doesn't hold a lot of water. It may run off from the surface and not penetrate. So we get tip dieback, decline, and those types of things. So root zone health. Number one thing I see for root zone health is mulch or other organic matter that can break down to be able to add nutrients into that soil around the living plants. So the pros, especially for mulch, are it's very low material cost. It's low labor cost to install. It moderates soil temperature and moisture. If you don't have mulch and you just have exposed soil, the soil temperatures can get very high during the day, baking in the sun. It's going to dry out that top layer and make it impervious to moisture, where mulch is going to keep those temperatures regulated, keep moisture regulated, add the organic matter, and it can make a permanent difference to the soil structure. The cons is when customers may prefer grass, and the effects do take time. So customers do prefer grass, and that's one thing that we have to overcome in our industry is at least explaining to the customer what that does to the tree, and giving them the option to say, all right, you can have the turf, but it's going to have these health effects on your tree, where diverse plantings can be quite aesthetically pleasing and much less maintenance, I find, than turf. Turf takes a lot of work, in my opinion, to keep healthy, but But trees, if you let them grow right in good soil, they're pretty happy. So what can we do to speed up the benefits of mulch, or say we aren't allowed to use mulch? This is where we'll talk about additives a little bit later, but to speed up the benefits of mulch when you put it down, if you want it to work a little quicker, is mycorrhizae needs food. That's what breaks down mulch and makes the sugars in that and the nutrients in that available to the tree. And the relationship they have with the tree is the tree has to give them the carbohydrates, and then they protect the tree and break down organic matter. It's that relationship. But if the trees are in decline, like we have in urban environments, they can't afford to kind of jumpstart that process. So we can add carbohydrates to the soil and kind of jumpstart that biodegradation process, jumpstart the mycorrhizae, the biological activity, and then we can add humic acid to it, which basically fakes organic matter, which will increase the soil's ability to hold nutrients and water and exchange it with the tree. So we came out with the ArborRx program, and what this is, it's tree and shrub nutrition for soil enhancement, but it's designed to maximize their health, where you can write the prescription for the site. And we've made that easy. We've got a little chart for you that we have coming up, but it's liquid solutions, so they don't require agitation. You could simply mix these in a bucket if you wanted and pour them around the tree if you don't have, the big plant healthcare equipment. But they're very easy to work with. And we also have Hydrotain, which is a moisture management product we'll talk more about later. But we have this nice chart that you can work with if you're working with it and say you want to have a prescriptive program for your customers that have different soil types. We have all these different products which we'll go over individually, but you have your general maintenance, sandy soils, clay soils, iron deficiencies, and it has kind of the dots and checks from what you might pick and choose for that type of soil. And then we also have these kind of tear-off pads if you wanted, and you kind of would go through and check off what you thought was appropriate for the deficiencies, whether it's the molasses because you want more biological activity, the iron plus because you have a little chlorosis, Arborplex, which is a slow-release nitrogen to kind of pick up a little bit of health in the soil if there's no organic matter. And it has the mix rates right on there, so it's very easy to pass off to a tech, or if you're new to it, it explains itself. So Arborplex is a 50-50 slow-release nitrogen. It's kind of the backbone of that ArborRx program if you want to use a little bit of nitrogen to get some growth. And then that's mixable with things like the BioMP, which is the molasses-based soil conditioner. And that's going to help break down the mulch for you, break down organic matter, boost microbial activity, really get the benefits of mulch much faster and kind of fake that environment that trees like. Trees like living, in the forest where they have things breaking down. They have nutrients in the soil. Take them to the urban environment, they don't have that. We can put some mulch down, and this helps speed up the benefits. Or if we're not allowed to use mulch, if it's in turf, we can put down the molasses seasonally to help keep the microbes a little healthier. EnviroPlex is a humic acid. And again, what humic acid does is it helps water hold and exchange water, soil hold and exchange water and nutrients with the tree. So it's basically faking organic matter in the soil until that mulch breaks down and gets into the profile. Iron Plus, this is for chlorotic trees, works very well. It's a chelated iron, so it's available even if the pH of the soil is a little off for iron availability. And you can use it. We have Minjet FE as an injectable iron for oaks, which works very well, oaks, maples, all sorts of things. But the Iron Plus is a soil in between the trunk injections, help keep things going quite a bit as well. This is the hygroscopic humectant Hydrotain. So what this does is it prevents evaporation in the soil. So when you have a water event, whether it be through irrigation or rain, it helps that water stay in the soil profile for 2 to 3 times longer. It lasts about 3 months on one application. It does break down naturally just by the microbiology in the soil. Does eat it, so it doesn't last too long, but 3 months is good enough to get you through, most of the country. July, August, September are dry here in the Northeast. If you live down south, you might need to put it down more than once or twice. But to be able to keep that moisture in the soil longer, especially if you don't have customers with irrigation or watering, can be a big benefit, especially on new plantings. I have one question. Are these liquids pet and bee friendly? Yes, these are all products that can be used in and around pets. They're not going to cause any issues with bees. Definitely, have the pets go inside. Some of these, they have some cautions. If you get them in your eyes directly as a concentrate, it can cause a little bit of irritation. So I would say that would be the only issue. You wouldn't want the pets around when you're putting this down in case it would have splashed in their eye. But you wouldn't have anything to be concerned about later with the pets coming back out if they were to eat the grass, eat the plants. Wouldn't cause any issues there. So nothing to worry about with the pets or the bees. So this is just a showing of that hydrotane on 2 planted trees. With establishment, water availability is the number one thing to keep that tree to establish and survive in the long term. When trees go into drought stress, they shed their leaves. It's how they stop transpiration. It's kind of a last-ditch effort. But when a new planting sheds its leaves, that's the kiss of death, and it can't produce photosynthates to repair its root system. So you get a big spiral of decline, and you can have a tree 10 years down the road that's still suffering and having pest pressure because it never established properly. So water availability is key in establishment. And then Cytogro is a root growth hormone derived from seaweed extracts. And seaweed extracts have been used for thousands of years. We haven't always called them cytokinins or know why, but even the Native Americans used to till seaweed into their fields and crops, and it was added a lot of organic matter, but it also added cytokinins, which is in the seaweed, which is a root growth hormone. But now we can extract those out and use them specifically for that purpose. And then there's also combination products like NutriRoot. So if you kind of don't want to worry about kind of picking, mixing, and matching, this one already has the seaweed extracts, the humic acids, the hydrotane, little bit of NPK, but it has iron, zinc, and manganese also. So it's a good combination product for general maintenance of larger trees and new plantings throughout the growing season. I've got one more question coming in. Can hydrotane be used during drought if the client's water? Yes. So it is beneficial during drought as long as it gets watered in. So if you water it in, it will get down to the plant. It will bond to the organic matter and be effective. It does have to be watered in though. It's best to do it a little beforehand so you don't get any of that drought stress beforehand, because the roots will start to senesce from drought stress. So we'd have to recover from it, but it is still effective during drought as long as it's watered in. So here's just a couple pictures. This tree was planted in very shallow soil, so it had poor water availability. And you can just see before and after, great green up on that tree, just from having seaweed extracts, water availability, and just nutrient availability in the soil. After just a couple months on these oaks, you can see, again, having that opportunity to have nutrients and water available, the trees will start to rebound a bit. So this is my front yard here. My wife and I, when I moved in, we took out all the turf in the front because we are tree people through and through. Did a nice diverse planting on some compacted soils, but we put down our mulch and just used a little bit of that NutriRoot a couple times a year. And you can see from 2014 to 2020, in just 6 years, how lush that planting became and how diverse of a planting it is. And with that, organic matter breaking down, it's a very healthy soil now. Very few pest issues we have to deal with, and it keeps our house a little shielded from the sun and the street lights. So that's also nice. But nice diverse plantings growing quickly with a healthy soil in an urban environment. So it does work. I practice exactly what I preach. And we have the AccuFlow soil injector, and this is a great way to apply those products if you don't have any bigger tanks or spray equipment. It's just a backpack unit. You can set the volume you want to inject. So whatever product you're using, you can set the rate, and it's an easy left-right toggle to just inject whatever you need for your product for the size of the tree. Very, very repeatable, accurate dosing, variable pressure, and it also has a spray wand to it, so it's a nice little sprayer for shrubs and smaller trees as well. So plant growth, I'll look for any questions. That's that segment, and then we'll go into our last one real quick. So I'll start answering questions now for a break. Will excess rainfall cause runoff of the chemical? No, it won't cause runoff of the products. They will get into the soil. The seaweed extracts get taken up by the tree. The moisture management products bond to the organic matter, so there won't be runoff. As long as it's not excessive rainfall, like as you're applying it, then yes, it would run off. And some of the things like the Arborplex, if you have really sandy soils, could flush through the soil profile. So that's also where something like the hygroscopic humectant, the hydrotane, helps keep the even fertilizers available to the plant longer and stops that running off through the soil. So rainfall is not an issue as long as it's not immediate. Next question is, how is bringing those products across the border to Canada from USA work? I live in Florida during the winter and live in Quebec during the summer. Several of those soil products are registered for use in Canada. So if you want to just reach out to us in an email, I'm Kevin Brewer at arborjet.com. I can get you the list of those products that are available in both countries. Several of them are, so those are the ones that wouldn't be an issue. Again, but just shoot us an email. I'll tell you which ones are available in both countries, and they're fine. And then, how many of these chemicals require pesticide applicator licenses? So that will depend on your individual states. I'm not aware of any states in my territory where there's 6 or 7 where soil application of soil products like moisture management, seaweed extracts require a license at all. So you'd have to check with your individual states. To my knowledge, it's not required in my area to use any of the soil amendment products. Plant growth regulators do require an applicator's license, but to my knowledge, the states I work in don't for the soil products. But again, check with your state. It could be different individually. Let's see. Another one, can they be applied spray to drip? Yes, some of the seaweed extract, the Cytogrow, that is a great foliar product. NutriRoot is a soil applied product. The Bloomplex or Arborplex, some of those fertilizers and the iron products, those can be applied foliarly. So they are different based on which ones they are. The moisture management product you want to put in the soil so it can bond to the roots. That would not be one you'd want to spray. But several of them can be. So, if you're interested in a few of them differently, again, reach out. We can exactly tell you which one you're interested in, if that could be sprayed or if it has to be soil applied. How often do you water your home garden with NutriRoot? I do my exterior plants twice a year, once in the spring, once in midsummer. Sometimes I'll do a fall application. It helps with winter desiccation. I'm in Southern Connecticut, so our winter desiccation isn't too bad, but I do it twice a year. If it's in my hanging baskets or my houseplants, I do a 1/3 rate and just do it once a month. Just to give them a little bit of consistent nutrients as the roots grow. But for exterior plants, once every couple months. For interior plants, I do it once a month. Next question is, can we inject NutriRoot with a traditional spray rig with a soil injector for deep root fern? Yes, absolutely. All these products can be used through traditional deep root fertilization equipment. We just have the AccuFlow as an easy way to step in for people that don't have that, but it works exactly well with any spray rigs you have, and they're all water soluble, so they mix well together and you don't need agitation. So that looks like the last question on that segment. So then we'll just go through plant growth regulators real quick, go through one last Q&A, and that'll wrap things up. So the reason plant growth regulators are a great benefit to trees after using the air knife is trees in decline. Sometimes if you can stunt that outward growth and let them repair their root systems internally and divert their energy to other things, can bounce back. But especially when you're root pruning or construction damaged trees, it allows them to not go into decline so quickly, maintain their water moisture better, and grow root structures back. So we have shortstop 2SC. It is a paclobutrazole is the active ingredient. So it's a cell elongation inhibitor. So what that does is, instead of the tree using a bunch of energy for cell elongation to take over the world and conquer the sun, it uses that energy for more self-defense compounds, root growth, and the leaf becomes much thicker, so it can control transpiration much better. And it does this by reducing the amount of gibberellic acid the tree produces and increasing the amount of abscisic acid it produces. So you can apply it anytime throughout the growing season. So you want the tree to be actively transpiring. You want there to be leaves on the tree, and it to be uptaking water. So in a drought situation, you wouldn't want to put it down unless you were going to water the tree. And you don't want to do it in the winter when they're dormant. But here in the Northeast, we get about a 4-year residual out of them. So you get a big bang for your buck, 3 years in Southern New England. Down south where the growing season is much more throughout the season, you might have to use them a little more often. But the benefits are still there. Very beneficial on stressed trees with damaged roots. And you can see here on an oak year over year, untreated to treated, all that energy it has to save. They're still going to make just as many leaves. They're just going to be a little bit thicker cuticle, a little bit more efficient at photosynthesis, but not have all that woody material in between. So lots of leftover energy. From the top, you'll see a much healthier looking leaf because it's a much more efficient and healthy chlorophyll. And a waxier cuticle, again, which slows down transpiration, which postpones drought stress. So in urban environments, city trees, street trees, where water can be a problem, combining NutriRoot and a PGR, you'll really extend the water in that plant and help stave off decline, which will stave off pest issues from native pests or foreign pests. So suspended concentrate, 22.3% active ingredient. It's on a clay particle, and you can do this, just keep them in suspension because it has that clay particle. You have to keep it in solution. So the AccuFlow ISD backpack recirculates automatically with our injector. If you're not using that, just make sure you give it a shake every now and then to keep it in solution. So it's soil applied right around the base of the tree. It just goes up through the vascular structure, gets into that apical meristem, that dominant bud, and that's where it does its magic as a plant growth hormone changer. So it reduces that gibberellic acid, which is that dominant stem's ability to slow down growth behind it and let it take the energy and allow it to use it in other ways. So thicker leaves, more chlorophyll, fibrous roots, more defense compounds. So just in theory, generally, this is how trees would use their energy, mostly for shoot growth and reproduction, which in the forest and naturally, that makes sense for trees. In the forest, they would have to grow up, claim as much sun as they can as quickly as possible, and then get into reproductive structures to pass it on to another generation. But in the urban environment, in our way of looking at trees, it's much more efficient where they don't need to conquer the world. They're already in the sun. They're in a planting bed. They're not in the woods, so they don't need to grow that quickly. But we need much more fine root growth, and we need more defense compounds and energy storage. And the defense compounds is what helps, especially when there's that, root pruning or construction damage, when we're bringing in that air knife to stop pests from being able to take over and cause, a real spiral of decline in that tree. So that drought resistance, just treated versus untreated, you can see on some poplar. You just get that tip dieback where they burn, they overheat, and it burns the leaf tissue when they go into that drought stress. Where treated, they need that water to kind of cool that photosynthetic process. So water is kind of the coolant there and then stops that burn. Cytospora cankerum blue spruce, this is just another disease that's helped with PGRs. Drought stress, construction stress exacerbates this disease and can cause it to take hold quite quickly. Where using a PGR, it can slow the progression of that disease, which chemically there's not much you can do to control this. So, using a PGR and looking at it a little differently, we can keep the stress off those plants. Sycamore anthracnose, another disease that likes stress plants, but then as a secondary stressor on its own. Again, it can interrupt that cycle because it overwinters on the twigs and then goes back to the leaves. So with a thicker cuticle, we interrupt that cycle when it infects the leaf tissue and defoliates the tree in the spring, then isn't there to go back to the twig. So we can break that disease cycle with a healthier, thicker leaf. And again, the application of that, we just use a probe 4 to 6 inches deep right around the base of the tree. Or you can just dig a moat around the tree and pour it in right around the base of it. But you want to apply it evenly around the base of the tree, or it could affect one side more than the other, especially on multi-stem trees. But you want to see the label. There's different rates for different types of trees. So you want to make sure you're following the label correctly for the tree species so you don't over-regulate. So again, that's just soil injections right around the base of the tree at a depth of about 6 inches, or just dig a little shallow moat right around the base of the tree and pour it in. And again, you can use the soil injector. We have a 9-gallon version or a 4-gallon. But these are great because you can just set the rate for the tree species. The mix rate's always the same. It's 11 parts water to 1 part shortstop. And then it's between 50 and 250 mils per inch in diameter. So you can just set the equipment for the rate for the tree and give it 1 injection per inch in diameter. It's a very efficient way to apply this product. And here's just an example of that label with the different trees for volume. So you just want to make sure you follow that for your tree species and you won't get into any trouble. So I will answer this last round of questions before I wrap up the review and take any other questions after that. So we have one. How can you sell a PGR to a residential customer? So there's a lot of different ways you could sell a PGR to a residential customer. So I find it very helpful with trees that need constant pruning, like crab apples or birch trees that grow very quickly. To be able to regulate the growth, it's much more cost effective to treat that tree once every couple of years with a PGR than prune it multiple times a season or every year to keep a certain look. And you're also not allowing that tree to waste its energy growing branches. We're just going to prune off the next year. Another way to sell it to a customer is, by improving the health of the tree. Again, they're able to hold on to that asset and the benefits that tree provides to them through stormwater mitigation, blocking sun and wind in the winter to their house, so it's stabilizing temperatures. So just a healthier tree. So the healthier tree can provide its benefits longer and more efficiently, or reduce pruning costs. So the next question I have is, how hard is it to get the dosage right with PGR? What are the negatives if it's not applied properly? If there are any limits on any species for PGRs? Some species are very sensitive to plant growth regulators. Japanese maples, American dogwoods, redbuds, they can be all sensitive to it. So you would see all those on the very low end of the spectrum. Japanese maples, I might just avoid. They are slower growing, and root damage to those, I'd probably go more towards a root growth hormone for those. But if you do over apply, you would use the Supersonic Air Knife and excavate the soil out around the base of the tree and remove that so it doesn't continue over regulating it. If you see a tree that gets over regulated, what might happen is the next year the leaves would come back and there'd be smaller than normal. You're not trying to regulate the leaf size. If you change the leaf size, it's a little over regulated. If it's not an extreme difference, it's no big deal. But if it's, that's what can happen when they do overdose correctly. But if you follow that label for the species and accurately dose it, like using the AccuFlow, set the equipment to the dose and mix it right, there's really no real worry about overdosing a tree as long as you follow that label. So the next questions, are there any problems applying shortstop during the heat of the summer, 95 plus, and or during drought? It's not going to have any issues with summer heat or during drought. You would want to just water it in at the time of application, not too much to soak it through the profile, but just to make sure it's getting through the surface, not just hanging up on the surface of a really dry, compacted soil. But it's not going to cause any phytotoxicity in the summer. So you don't have to worry about that. So if anybody thinks of any other questions, feel free to type them in while I give the review. But you really can't be a full service tree company without offering the services that the Supersonic Air Knife provides. Preventative plant health care and addressing the root of the problem, we have to do to take care of trees in urban environments. So, to call yourself full service, you really have to be able to offer these services and look for the root of the problem. It's not just a pun. A lot of times unhealthy trees, looking down and underground is where you're going to find it. And maintaining healthy soils maintains healthy trees. We can do that through managing the moisture, applying mulch, making sure we have diverse plantings. And, the more trees, the better for all of us, for the planet, for our minds. That, the benefits of being near trees is just, the research they're looking into that. They do so much for our mental health and for everything for our lives. So more trees, the better. And with that, I thank you. My contact information's here. I love chatting about trees. So if anybody wants to ever call me or email me with any questions, I'm here. I will also hang out for, a minute or two for any last questions to come in. And if not, again, thank you for joining me today. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation and learned something. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.